For as long as I can remember, I've always put in more effort than those around me, not for recognition, but because I value hard work and collaboration. At my first job, I often stayed late, took on additional duties, and assisted others. Initially, it seemed like we were all working towards a common goal. However, as time went on, I noticed that while I was putting in extra hours, others were leaving early or shifting their responsibilities onto me. Eventually, I found myself doing the work of multiple people. Management didn't seem concerned, and my colleagues became skilled at avoiding responsibility. The sense of camaraderie disappeared, and my frustration grew. Now, as a manager, I see the same behavior. If I even glance at someone's file, they assume I'll handle it. I've tried confronting the slackers, but upper management doesn't allow me to take action. When I attempted to terminate one underperforming employee, the union intervened and management dismissed the issue due to her connections. I warned them it would backfire, but nothing changed. 5 years ago, before I was promoted, I nearly stopped helping others. My co-workers convinced management that I had an easier workload because I was efficient. A new manager reassigned tasks, even though I was managing 43% of the workload. Some colleagues resented me, calling me a bootlicker. I didn't have many friends at work, partly because I was also in the Army Reserve. Last year I spent 100 days on military assignments which didn't sit well with my employer, but I didn't mind. I enjoyed the military work and seized every opportunity. However, my home life suffered too. My wife and I were both unhappy with our jobs. Though we earned good salaries, over $60,000 for me and mid-$50,000 for her, we rarely had time to enjoy it. We could afford nice things but didn't buy them because we were too busy to use them. Vacations were infrequent unless work related, and even though we had paid off everything and were saving money, Boa and I spent less and less time together. When we were younger, especially in college, we were deeply in love and inseparable. But after our son Charles was born, it became harder to find time for intimacy. Our careers and my reserve duties took up most of our time, leaving little room to reconnect. I became the main caregiver for Charles, and many days I left for work before Boa was even awake. By the time evening came, we were either too busy or too exhausted to spend time together. On Monday, August 21st, Charles, now 20, was heading back to college. He asked for a family breakfast before leaving and seemed upset. I could tell he sensed the tension in our family. When I asked him what was wrong, he said he felt like something wasn't right anymore. Boa barely acknowledged him, engrossed in her book. After breakfast, I walked with Charles to his truck. He hugged me tightly and said, "Dad, I understand. You need to get a life and be happy again." His words hit me hard. I watched him drive away, feeling emptier than ever, heading to a job I despised. Boa had slept late all weekend and went out with friends Saturday night, while Charlie and I spent time together before he left for school. Boa mostly read and didn't help with his barbecue send-off. She was late to the table, absorbed in her book. At work, one of my claims representatives, who also happened to be the union steward, brought in a difficult client she couldn't handle. I wasn't surprised, as I had already been listening to the interview. I took over and dealt with the rude, demanding client trying to file a fraudulent claim. After an hour, I got him out of the office. I was the last one there besides the manager, John, who invited me for a beer. We had a drink, but I felt guilty for spending even a little time at the bar. When I got home, the kitchen was dark, and Boa hadn't made dinner. I found her in the den reading with a plate of snacks beside her. She didn't even greet me. "No dinner?" I asked, irritated. She shrugged, said she'd had a sandwich, and told me to fix something for myself. Frustrated, but not wanting to argue, I made a sandwich and grabbed another beer. As I ate, I reflected on my life and how overwhelmed I felt. I knew something had to change, but I wasn't sure what or how to do it. Boa barely spent any time with me anymore, and I was tired of her going out and ignoring me when she was home. We used to argue about it, but I eventually gave up. I had considered divorce but didn't want to disrupt Charlie's life while he was still living with us. Looking back, our relationship had been deteriorating for years. After dinner, I cleaned up and went to my office to work. I had learned not to bother Boa when she was reading. She would either ignore me or walk away. Feeling frustrated, I poured myself a glass of scotch and sat down, trying to calm my nerves. What am I doing, I thought. I'm married, But I feel completely alone. I work over 40 hours a week at my civilian job and put in another 60 hours a month for the reserves. I'm exhausted. I have to maintain the house, the vacation cabin, and stay in shape for the army. Everything's paid off, but we don't even get to enjoy it. I laughed bitterly. We've got $1 million in savings and nearly the same in retirement accounts. We could retire and live off the interest, but Bua won't agree. I laughed again. Even if she didn't work, she probably wouldn't spend time with me. Sometimes I wonder if she's having an affair. I had looked into it before and found nothing, but I still couldn't shake the feeling. She ignores me, never kisses me, and when she agrees to be intimate, it feels like she's doing me a favor. Later I heard her get into bed. I decided to try initiating something. It's been 3 weeks, I thought as I climbed into bed. I touched her, but she slapped my hand away. No, she muttered. I tried again, and she repeated, no curling into a ball and going to sleep. Frustrated, I got up and went back to my office, turning to an adult site. It feels like she's not even here, I thought bitterly. I don't even want to be with her anymore. The next morning, my alarm went off at 5 a.m. and Bua snapped, turn that thing off. Why don't you sleep in the spare room if you have to get up so early? I had wanted to sleep in, but I had to head to the reserves later that night. After a long day, a friend of mine stopped by my office. Ron, still up for dinner? You look like you could use some cheering up, he said. I had intended to go straight home, but with a sigh I agreed. We had drinks and dinner, and as we ate he asked, what's been going on with you? For some reason I opened up about everything, my job, my marriage, and my future. By the end of it, I found myself admitting honestly the only bright spot in my life right now is the reserves. Jeff leaned back and said, Ronnie, I don't know your wife, but what you've described doesn't seem normal. It sounds like she's avoiding you and doesn't care anymore. I sighed. I've wondered if she's cheating, but I don't think so. I even followed her once and found nothing. Jeff raised an eyebrow. What did you find? Nothing. It just feels like something's missing. Maybe I pushed her away. She's always with her friends. Jeff leaned in and suggested, why not find out for sure? You don't have to do it yourself, I asked. What do you mean? He replied. My cousin and brother-in-law are private investigators. They could help. I rubbed my face, feeling the weight of the suggestion. I don't know, Jeff. I hate spending money on that. Jeff smiled. Ronnie, you deserve to know. Let me call them. What's the worst that could happen? I stared at my empty glass and finally sighed. Go ahead. Jeff looked surprised. Yeah, have them call me. If we agree on a price, I'll hire them. I need to know if she's cheating. If she is, I'm done. If not, she's still going to have to change. Jeff gave me his work number and said, I think you're doing the right thing. I woke up the next morning, hungover in Jeff's hotel room. Sunday's reserve meeting dragged on, and all I could think about was getting home. When I finally did, Bula didn't ask where I had been. She didn't seem to care. I tried talking to her, but she made it clear I was bothering her, so I gave up, cleaned up, and went to bed. By Monday, Jeff's brother-in-law called, and I agreed to start the surveillance. They stayed at my cabin, using GPS trackers, bugs, and even recorded conversations from Bula's phone and car. After the first week, they found nothing. Bula spent her evenings with work friends, going to bars, chatting about celebrities, and occasionally visiting the library. One Saturday, they followed her to a small party, just her friends, no men. This pattern continued for 6 weeks. She wasn't cheating. Even though I was convinced she wasn't having an affair, the distance between us remained. I tried everything, bringing flowers, cooking her favorite meals, calling her at work, and asking her out, but every effort was met with anger or indifference. She wouldn't let me kiss her, and nothing seemed to work. In the 7th week of the investigation, the private investigators called me at work. Ronnie once said, you might want to head home early. We overheard Bula talking to someone in HR, saying, let's do it tonight. While Ronnie's still at work, my heart sank. After a meeting, I rushed home, arriving 30 minutes earlier than usual. A strange Lexus was in the driveway. I quietly entered through the kitchen, hoping to catch her in the act. In the den, Bula was sitting with a glass of wine, and a man was in my chair, drinking my scotch. There was a laptop, a printer, and her company's logo on the table. You're home early, Bula said. Good. I figured that phone call might bring you home early. She gestured to the man. This is one of our attorneys, and we can finalize everything now. The man handed me an envelope. You've been served. These are divorce papers. Mrs. Stevens is being fair, but you can have your attorney review them. Stunned, I asked why. Why don't you want to fix this?" She replied, "Ronnie, we've grown apart, we don't fit anymore. You've changed, you got caught up in the reserves and never grew with me. I've noticed you've been trying lately, but you're boring now. All you talk about is work, investments, or the news. I spend more time with my friends because they're interesting. You always take management's side and don't care about my feelings." She added, "I thought you were having an affair, and when I found out you were investigating me, I let it happen. I hoped you'd learn something, but you didn't. You just tried the same things to get me to be intimate." Bula sighed. "It's time to end this. I want to enjoy my life without worrying about you. I've offered a fair settlement. You get the cabin and the land, I keep the house. If you don't agree," I thanked him and returned to my office. Coincidentally, the second item in my inbox was a list of available tours. I read through it carefully. A few caught my eye: one in Hawaii for 6 months, another in Great Britain for a year, and a couple in the US for a year. By the end of the day, I had made my decision and requested orders for either Hawaii or Great Britain. I signed the paperwork that Sunday, then returned to my monotonous routine. The only bright spot during that time was the completion of my new garage and breezeway. I'd come home, check the construction progress, then do paperwork, work on my computer, or just exist. I turned the dining area of my cabin into an office with a desk, file cabinets, and a TV I could use as a computer monitor. I spent my time trading stocks, researching, or browsing the internet. Slowly, I started getting to know my neighbors. On weekends, I'd visit local cafes or grab breakfast on my way to work. Some of the locals, like Jim Fielding, a retired Army officer, tried to convince me to go to the senior center dances. Jim joked, "The women don't care how old you are, they might even prefer you if you can still get it up." After my divorce, the women at the dances practically fought over me. The men laughed and encouraged me to join in. In the evenings, I enjoyed the peaceful view from my yard overlooking the river. A small inlet with a gravel bar ran beside my yard, where a spring trickled into the water. There was a deep swimming hole nearby, perfect for fishing. I looked forward to summer and watching the canoeists pass by, hoping some would stop for a swim. The serenity of the setting helped me relax more than I ever did at my house in town. As spring approached, I started planning a landscaping project for my yard. Around that time, I also couldn't stop thinking about the women at the senior center dances. It had been almost 7 months since I'd had sex, and I was feeling the lack. Masturbation wasn't cutting it anymore, so I finally let the guys talk me into going to the Christmas meal and dance at the senior center. At the dance, one of the regulars introduced me to people. Just as the guys had warned, I was quickly surrounded by women, some my age or a little older, eager to meet me. I danced more than I sat, and many of the women were quite forward, even rubbing or touching me. Around 10 p.m., I stepped outside, and one of the more assertive women followed me. She wrapped her arms around me and kissed me. She didn't hold back, saying, "I heard you haven't had sex in months, so let's do it now." I didn't stop her, and we ended up having sex. Afterward, she kissed me and said, "That was good, Ron. I'm here at every dance, so if you want to do this again, I'm in the book." I returned to the dance with shaky knees. My friend Teddy laughed and teased me. "Looks like Rose got another one." "You okay, stud?" I felt a little embarrassed. I sat down but soon noticed Rose leaving with another man. Teddy had warned me earlier that she often has a few guys at these dances and sometimes goes home with different ones. "Be careful with her," he had said. "Always use protection. She's been married and divorced 5 times, but she definitely knows her way around in bed later." A widow named Addie asked me to dance. She held me close, resting her head on my shoulder. "If you're interested in me, stay away from Rose," she whispered. "She's been known to give men gifts you don't want, so you might want to get checked out." I hadn't even considered the possibility of disease when I slept with Rose. Feeling queasy, I left the dance early and headed home. That Monday, I scheduled a doctor's appointment to get tested. I was a mess until the results came back clear at the end of the week. I vowed never to have sex again without protection. I stocked up on condoms and made sure I had them in my truck, wallet, and at home. I also decided to get tested for HIV/HIV a couple of times over the next year, just to be cautious. On December 21st, I came home to find active duty orders for Hawaii starting January 6 for 6 months. The next day, I gave a copy to my boss and requested military leave. He and his supervisor weren't pleased and asked if I could cancel the orders, but I refused. From that point on, they were noticeably cold toward me. Christmas was tough. My son Charlie stayed with me for 5 days before leaving to spend New Year's with his mom. He apologized, but I understood. His friends and the fun were all in town. I was just grateful for the time he had spent with me. The week before my deployment, I took vacation time to prepare. I arranged for Jeff and his wife to look after the cabin and had my mail forwarded to Hawaii. Hawaii was gorgeous, and I enjoyed both the work and the scenery, especially the women. I decided to have some fun while I was there, though I didn't get emotionally attached to anyone. If we didn't sleep together, I wouldn't go out with them again. That became my rule. The women who frequented the same spots got used to this, and many were just looking for a good time in return for meals, drinks, or occasionally resort weekends. I preferred tourists because they were there to enjoy themselves and wouldn't want anything long-term. By the end of my tour, I was tanned, in excellent shape, and thoroughly satisfied. I returned home in early July and went to my office to arrange my return to work. However, my entry codes didn't work, so I had to wait for the office to open. When I finally got in, some co-workers greeted me, but most just stared. I asked to see my old boss, only to be told he no longer worked there. I was directed to the new assistant manager, Belinda Scroggin. Belinda sat behind my old desk and, in a patronizing tone, asked how she could help me. I explained I was there to arrange my return and handed her my release orders and paperwork. Without even looking at them, she sneered, "There's no job for you here. You resigned, and both the manager and assistant manager positions are filled. We don't need any more help." I was stunned. I sat there in disbelief, feeling my temper rise not just because of the job situation but because of Belinda's rude and unlawful response. Leaning back, I calmly said, "First, I didn't resign, I was placed on military leave. Second, I don't need to be rehired because I was never terminated, unless it was a mistake. And third, what you're doing is illegal, under USERRA. I'm entitled to my old job with the same seniority or a higher position if I would have been promoted during my leave. Since my old manager is gone, I expect to be placed either in my previous role as assistant manager or, possibly, the manager's position." Belinda glared at me, her face flushed with anger. "You've got more nerve than any man I've met," she spat. "This conversation is over. Leave before I call security," I replied. "Fine. But I want to see the paperwork showing I resigned and a written rejection of my reinstatement request." She immediately called security and had Terry, the security guard, escort me out. Terry looked embarrassed as he asked me to leave. As I stood up, I warned Belinda, "You're making a serious mistake. You should contact HR before this escalates." That evening I tried calling my old boss, but his number was disconnected. I wrote a letter to the HR department requesting reinstatement and attached the same documents I had tried to leave earlier. I sent it by certified mail, along with copies of my military leave paperwork. Over the next few days I called my old office, but they ignored me. 2 weeks later, I received a letter stating they had no job for me, claiming I had voluntarily resigned and would need to reapply. I immediately hired a lawyer and filed for unemployment benefits. I spent the summer enjoying myself working in the garden, fishing, swimming, and relaxing by the river. I kept up with my reserve duties and took a few short training tours. I started recognizing some of the people who passed by in canoes on the river, especially one friendly group of 2 men and 2 women who would wave and shout greetings as they floated by. Recently I noticed that one of the canoes now had 2 women, while the other still had a man and a woman. One day, while I was fishing, I saw the 2 canoes paddling toward me quickly, as if they were in a hurry. They turned toward my gravel bar and beach. The 2 women from the first canoe got out quickly, followed by the man and woman from the second canoe, who secured both boats. They all walked right past my no trespassing sign. I was about to say something when one of the women from the 2-woman canoe limped over to me with a hesitant smile. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, wincing. "I know you have a sign, but this is kind of an emergency. Could you help me?" I looked down and saw a bloody rag hanging out of her shoe, which had a gash on the side. She was limping worse now. I stood up quickly as she sat on the bench at my picnic table, grimacing in pain. Her foot was bleeding badly. "Someone broke a glass bottle on the rocks," she explained, clearly upset. "I stepped on it, and it went through my shoe into my foot. We can't get the bleeding to stop." I quickly picked her up and carried her to my house. Someone opened the door. I called over my shoulder, "I'll take her to the bathroom." To help, I set her on the edge of the tub, ran warm water, and carefully cleaned the wound. After disinfecting it, I asked one of the other women to get my first aid kit from under the sink. I applied a pressure bandage and showed them how to press down above the wound. You need stitches, I told the group. It's not too serious, but it needs to be closed up. I can drive her to the hospital if you'd like. The injured woman, who I now noticed was quite fit and beautiful, glanced at her foot, which was still bleeding a little. I think he's right, she said. I need to go, and he seems trustworthy. Her friend asked, can we leave the canoe here? I nodded, and she hurried off to secure it. I pulled my truck closer, and when she returned, I tossed a chain to the man, instructing him to lock the canoe to a tree. We set off for the hospital, and during the drive, the woman introduced herself. I'm Laura Childs, she said. I live with my parents about 4 miles downstream. I used to have a boyfriend, but we broke up when I found out he wasn't actually divorced. Her friend muttered something as she said this. I learned that her family knew some of my friends, including Jeff and Charlie. We shared a few stories on the way to the hospital. Once we arrived, we checked in, and the usual waiting began. About 45 minutes later, Laura's brother and an older woman, who appeared to be their mother, showed up. Her brother, Aaron, rushed up to me. Where's Laura? He asked, his face pale with worry. She's in an exam room, I replied. Ask the clerk, and they'll tell you where. Aaron hurried off to find Laura, while their mother, who introduced herself as Connie, stood by my chair and smiled. She extended her hand and said, "Thank you for helping my daughter. I apologize for my son's behavior. He's very protective of Laura and doesn't handle it well. When she's hurt." I nodded and replied, "I understand. We're practically neighbors, so I'm sure I'll see you around." Connie smiled again before excusing herself to check on Laura, mentioning that they had enough room to get everyone home. After that, I decided to stay in town for dinner. While waiting at my favorite restaurant, I noticed my ex-wife Bula sitting with her friends and 2 flamboyant men. One of the women with them was Belinda Skagans. They were laughing and chatting, discussing the latest scandal involving one of Bula's favorite actresses. I walked by unnoticed, eavesdropped for a bit, but quickly lost interest and returned to my table, thinking to myself, it takes all kinds. At least I knew I hadn't been replaced. After dinner, I went home, showered, and poured myself a glass of Glenmorangie. I sat out on my patio, gazing at the stars, feeling content. There was no one around to bother me, and I could do as I pleased. As I relaxed, I considered building a privacy fence so I could sunbathe nude in the summer without worrying about river traffic. Though I missed female companionship, there wasn't anyone nearby who piqued my interest. Most of the women in town were either friends of Bula's or former colleagues. I felt lonely but knew I was better off than when I was with Bula. Jeff kept urging me to attend the senior center dances or join the group at the cafe, but I preferred my solitude, especially during the mornings by the river, enjoying the peace and watching the sunrise. One early morning as I was fishing by the river, I heard a loud hum that kept getting closer. Annoyed, I glanced up to see a flat-bottomed John boat speeding toward me from around the bend. Knowing it would disturb the quiet morning and ruin the fishing, I was irritated. As the boat approached, I saw it was Aaron, Cindy, and an older man. Aaron waved as they pulled into my cove and beached the boat, ignoring the no trespassing sign. They headed straight toward me. With a sigh, I reeled in my line and walked over to greet them. Aaron smiled and shook my hand. "Mr. Stevens, thanks again for helping us last week," he said. "This is my father, Roger. We're here to get the other canoe, and then we'll be out of your way." Roger also shook my hand and added, "I appreciate what you did for Laura. I'd like to replace the fuel you used taking her to the hospital. If you stop by my place, we can top off your truck from our supply." "No need, Mr. Childs," I replied. "I had to go to town anyway for groceries and a meal. It wasn't a special trip." They seemed puzzled when I mentioned my meal, and Roger asked, "Did something happen?" I sighed. "It's not about the fuel. I just ran into my ex-wife at the restaurant, and it kind of ruined my appetite. I guess I'm still not fully over the divorce." I felt my anger rise, thinking about Bula and the entire situation. Quickly, I excused myself, saying, "I'll grab the key for the canoe." I retrieved the key from inside the door and handed it to Aaron, who unlocked the canoe. I muttered an apology, still feeling frustrated, then walked back inside while they took the canoe and left. The next few days were slow, filled with thoughts about my failed marriage and job. I was angry not just about the divorce, but also about the way my job had lied about me quitting and had illegally refused to reinstate me. Whether I won my case or not, I knew I wasn't going back to that place. My only goal now was to make them pay for what they had done. About a week later, as I was enjoying a sunset by the river, I heard a boat approaching. It was Roger's John boat again, but this time Laura was alone, steering upstream. She smiled and waved as she pulled into my landing, carrying a Tupperware container. She walked up and said, "Dad told me you wouldn't let him replace the fuel," she said with a grin. "So I brought you a carrot cake with cream cheese icing, my favorite." My mouth watered. "That's my favorite too. Let's eat some right now." Laura blushed and hesitated. "I really need to get back before it gets dark." "Come on," I insisted, taking her hand. "We'll be quick," she reluctantly agreed, and we went inside. I cut 2 slices of cake, poured us some port, and started making coffee. As we ate, Laura bit her lip and said, "Ron, I know you're divorced, and if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." Hearing her bring up the divorce stirred emotions I thought I had buried. I clenched my jaw. "Laura," I said slowly, "I can't talk about that. I loved her, and she slipped away. I just can't, trying to control my emotions." I walked to the door. Laura followed quietly and gently touched my back. "I'm sorry, Ron," she said softly. "I'll leave, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here." I watched her climb back into the boat and drift downstream, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The following Saturday, I was working in my garden by the river, just about ready to stop because of the heat, when I saw Laura and her friend Tammy approaching in a canoe. They paddled directly to my landing and pulled the canoe ashore. Laura bounced up the bank with a smile, while Tammy followed more cautiously. "Ron, I'm really sorry about the other night," Laura began. "I shouldn't have brought up your divorce. I didn't mean to upset you." She paused, then added, "Tammy and I are hungry, and you've got such a nice place here. If we share our lunch, can we use your table?" I was caught off guard by the bold request, especially since she was aware of my no trespassing signs. I stared at her for a moment, and she seemed to shrink under my gaze, turning to leave. "I guess not," she muttered. "Sorry to bother you." As they headed back to the canoe, I overheard Tammy say, "Told you he's in a hole," that snapped me out of it. I called after them, "Wait, I'm sorry. I've had a hard time dealing with people since my divorce. Please come back, you can use the table, and you don't even have to share your lunch." Tammy shot back, "Forget it," but Laura managed to convince her to return. They came back with a large cooler and set up a picnic at my table, laying out cold fried chicken, potato salad, coleslaw, and iced tea, plenty for 3 people. "Want me to heat the chicken?" "I've got some fresh tomatoes too," I offered. Laura beamed. "That would be great." I quickly warmed the chicken, washed my hands, and sliced the tomatoes, adding some freshly baked bread. When I returned, Laura was already at my breakfast bar, smiling. "Need help with that?" she asked as I approached with the food. I waved her off with a grin, joking about the amount of food they'd brought. We all sat down to eat, and despite the awkward start, the meal turned out to be pleasant. At one point I got up to grab the salt and pepper, but Laura insisted on getting it herself. While she was inside, Tammy leaned in, her voice low and serious. "Ron, I don't know what to think of you, but if you hurt Laura, I'll make you regret it. She's been through enough." I shot back, "You don't sit at my table and accuse me of that. I have no intention of hurting anyone." Tammy flushed, but before she could respond, Laura returned and sensed the tension. "Tammy, what did you do?" she asked. Tammy muttered, "Nothing," but Laura apologized on her behalf, assuring me that Tammy meant well. Laura gently placed her hand over mine, thanking me for the meal and my hospitality. As they packed up and left, Laura waved with a big smile. Despite the tension with Tammy, I realized I had enjoyed the lunch. Watching them paddle away, I felt conflicted. I liked Laura more than I wanted to admit, but after everything I'd been through, I wasn't sure I could trust my own emotions. That evening, I sat by the river, gazing at the stars, my thoughts drifting to Laura. There was something about her that intrigued me, and I found myself thinking about her more than I wanted to. Over the next few days, I tried to keep busy, but memories of that lunch and her smile kept popping into my mind. Then, on Wednesday evening, something unexpected happened. I was skinny dipping in the river, as I often did when I heard someone calling my name. Startled, I hurriedly pulled on my shorts and stood up just in time to see Laura rounding the corner of the house, holding a pie. Her face turned bright red as she realized what had just happened. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know. I wasn't trying to peek." I felt a flash of irritation but quickly let it go when I saw how embarrassed she was. Smiling, I said, "It's all right." "You brought a pie," still flustered. She nodded. "It's an apple pie. I drove this time since it's dark, but I didn't realize you locked your gate." She was clearly uncomfortable, but I didn't want her to leave just yet. Without thinking, I gently grabbed her arm, but she froze, eyes wide, so I quickly let go. "Sorry," I said. "I didn't want you to leave so soon. If you have time, you're welcome to stay for dinner." Laura's smile returned. "Well, don't let me stop you. Go ahead and cook." I smiled back, relieved she wasn't leaving, and began frying up some chicken, reheating the potato and bean salads I'd made earlier. I decided to cook enough for both of us, hoping she'd stay. As the chicken cooked, I poured us each a glass of white wine. Laura took a sip and smiled. "This is really good." I moved closer, and we chatted as I finished cooking. She asked about my life, and I told her about my time in the Army Reserve and my ongoing lawsuit against my former employer. She seemed genuinely interested. Then she shared her own story: divorced, raised on the river, and working part-time at a farm supply store after leaving a job at a feed mill. As we ate, the conversation flowed naturally, and before long Laura realized I'd made enough food for two. "You tricked me," she teased with a grin. "I never said I'd stay for dinner afterward." We cleaned up together and enjoyed the apple pie she'd brought, along with glasses of port. We moved to the living room, and after a while Laura rested her head on my shoulder. It felt peaceful. Without thinking, I leaned in and kissed her gently. The moment lingered, both of us lost in the kiss, until we finally pulled back, seeing the same longing in each other's eyes. Laura sighed contentedly, leaning against my chest. We sat there in comfortable silence until the phone rang, startling both of us. I got up to answer. "Hello," I said. "Ron, this is Connie Childs. I'm starting to worry. Laura was supposed to bring you a pie, but it's late, and she hasn't come home yet. It's after midnight. Can you help me out here?" I laughed and, without thinking, replied, "Yeah, Connie, I can help." We were sleeping, and time just got away from us. I heard both Laura and Connie gasp at the same time. No, that's not what I meant." I quickly clarified. "We fell asleep after dinner." Laura, now laughing, took the phone from me. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was going to leave the pie and head home, but his gate was locked, so I had to walk. Then he invited me to dinner, and we had dessert and some wine, and yes, we fell asleep on the couch. We'd still be asleep if you hadn't called. I'll be home soon. Love you, bye." After hanging up, Laura smiled at me. "Well, I guess I'd better head home. Mum won't sleep until I'm back." She gently touched my face and added, "Thanks for a lovely evening, Ron." Then she kissed me softly and hurried out the door. I remembered she had walked from the gate and rushed after her. "Wait, Laura, I'll drive you." That night I barely slept, thinking about Laura. The next morning I woke up at my usual time but felt exhausted. Around 11, my lawyer called to let me know my case had been scheduled for a hearing. I headed into town to meet with him, and on my way home that evening I stopped by Laura's farm to return the cake and pie pans. I saw her approaching the house, covered in dust and wearing worn jeans, a chambray shirt and boots. She blushed as soon as she noticed me. "Hello, Ron. What brings you here?" I lifted the containers with a smile. "Just returning these." Laura invited me inside, where I greeted her mother, Connie, who was busy making dinner. Laura excused herself to go change out of her dirty clothes. Connie smiled and said, "You had me worried the other night." She handed me a glass of iced tea and asked me to keep her company while Laura got ready. Not long after, Laura returned, looking gorgeous in a sundress, her wet hair and natural beauty taking my breath away. "My God, you're stunning," I blurted out. Laura smiled warmly and took my hand, pulling me in for a gentle kiss. "Why don't we sit until dinner's ready? You are staying, right?" Connie reassured me that there was plenty of food, but I hesitated. "I only came to return the containers. I can't stay for dinner." Still holding my arm, Laura insisted, "You stayed for dinner at your place, so you're staying here." She led me into the family room, and we sat on a love seat. She quickly settled onto my lap, leaning in for another kiss. Just as we were getting comfortable, we heard voices and footsteps. Roger and Aaron walked in. "Laura," Roger exclaimed. She pulled back slightly. "Daddy, I'm spending time with Ron. We'll see you at dinner." Roger shook his head and led Aaron out of the room, muttering, "At least they haven't fallen asleep again." At dinner, I apologized for intruding, but Roger, Connie, and Laura assured me I was always welcome. "We always have room for one more," Roger said, and the others nodded in agreement. As we enjoyed dessert, I mentioned I'll be gone for 3 months. If you see anyone at my place, please let Jeff or Charlie Fielding know. I'll leave my cell number before I go. I glanced at Laura and saw her expression tighten. Her voice shook slightly as she asked, "Where are you going, Ron?" "I've got a short tour of the 7th Medcom in Heidelberg, Germany," I replied with a chuckle. I enjoy the military more than my old job. Since the divorce, I've been taking these tours and I'm making almost as much as I used to. Plus, I get to travel. Laura placed her hand on my arm and softly asked, "When do you leave?" "I've just started enjoying our time together. I'll miss you. Please write me." I smiled and replied, "Of course, I'd love that." Roger then chimed in, "Ron, are you interested in renting out your cropland to us? I could offer you a crop share or pay cash." I thought for a moment. "If you leave the yard and garden for me, I don't see why not." Before Roger could respond, Laura interrupted, "Daddy, can't this wait?" "I won't see Ron for a while," I laughed and said, "It won't take long," but then blushed, realizing how it sounded. Roger, Aaron, and I headed to their office to finalize the crop share arrangement. As we finished, Laura walked in with a playful grin. "Are you done? Can I have my man back now?" I stood up, surprised by her words, but Laura just smiled and took my hand, leading me to the riverbank. She laid cushions on the ground, and we sat together, sharing a gentle kiss. "Ron, I really enjoy being with you. There's something about you that makes me feel safe and cared for," she said softly. I kissed her and replied, "I feel the same way, Laura. I never thought I'd let someone in again after what happened with Bula, but I want to see where this goes." We spent the evening kissing and learning more about each other. Even though I knew she would have let me take things further, I stopped us. "I want to wait until it feels special. If we do this now, right before I leave, it will feel like one of the flings I had in Hawaii. Let's wait until I get back." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes, but she smiled and agreed. "I want it now, but I want to wait too." We walked back to the house, hand in hand, and I said my goodbyes. I didn't see Laura again before I left for Germany, but she stayed on my mind. Jeff drove me to the airport, and I told him about the arrangement I had made with the Childs for renting the land. He grinned. "So has Laura got her hooks in you yet? Abby says she's head over heels for you." "Yeah, Jeff, I think she might," I admitted. "I never thought I'd consider getting serious again after Bula, but Laura's different." Germany was beautiful, but the months dragged on. Laura and I exchanged frequent emails, and I realized just how much I missed her. When I returned, I expected Jeff to pick me up, but instead, I saw Laura running toward me. She threw her arms around me and kissed me passionately. "I've missed you so much," she said, breathless. "I missed you too," I replied, smiling as I grabbed my bags. Laura had driven my truck to the airport and insisted on driving us home. Instead of heading to her parents' place, she took me to my house, which was decorated with welcome home banners and had a cooler of champagne waiting. "I've missed you so much," Laura whispered softly. "This is for our private welcome home party." I smiled and pulled her close. "Let's watch the sunset by the river. It'll be even better with you." We walked to the riverbank, where Laura sat in my lap, resting her head on my chest. We kissed gently, savoring the moment. Later we returned to the house, where Laura had set out snacks, and we spent hours cuddling and talking. Eventually, Laura led me to the bedroom, and we made love with a passion that had been building for months. Afterward, she snuggled into me and I whispered, "Laura, I love you. I never thought I'd love again, but you've proven me wrong. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled and nodded. "Yes, Ron, I'll marry you." We drifted to sleep, content in each other's arms. I woke up about an hour later and went to the bathroom, noticing that Laura had quietly put the food away without me hearing. After finishing, I crawled back into bed and we slept peacefully through the night. The next morning, sunlight streaming through the windows slowly woke me. Laura wasn't in bed, but I smelled coffee brewing. Still groggy, I poured myself a cup and wandered outside, following my usual routine. When I reached the breezeway, I saw Laura sitting under my favorite tree, also undressed, sipping her coffee and enjoying the morning. She heard me and smiled. "Are you just going to stand there, or are you going to kiss me good morning and sit down?" I walked over, kissed her, and sat beside her. We talked about our future together, until the sound of a canoe approaching signaled the end of our peaceful morning. Arm in arm, we returned to the house, showered together, and Laura made breakfast. As she loaded the dishwasher, I hugged her from behind and kissed her neck. She smiled and kissed me back. "Honey, Put on that dress from yesterday and let's go to town. We've got something important to buy, don't we? I teased. Laura grinned. If it's what I think it is, then yes, let's go. Within 10 minutes we were out the door. We spent a few hours picking out her ring, then had lunch at Max's. When we got home, we didn't even make it inside before falling into bed again. After another passionate round, we drifted off to sleep. I was awoken by the sound of hammering and shouting. Slowly I got up, threw on my shorts, and stumbled to the door. Roger, Connie, Aaron and his girlfriend were there. I let them in, and Connie asked, "Where's Laura? I thought she was with you." My stomach tightened, just as Laura's voice called from the bedroom. "Ron, who are you talking to?" she asked, stepping out of the bedroom unclothed. When she saw our visitors, she turned bright red and hurried back inside, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, speechless, while Roger stared at the door, wide-eyed. Connie and the women, blushing, followed her to offer comfort. A few minutes later, Laura reappeared, still blushing but with more confidence. She walked up to me, wrapped her arms around mine, and kissed me gently. "Daddy, I'm sorry I didn't call last night. I'm staying here now. We're getting married." Roger, looking concerned, asked, "Are you sure everything's okay?" Laura smiled and nodded. "Yes, Daddy. I'll be staying here unless Ron says otherwise." She glanced at me, and I pulled her closer. Roger shook my hand, offering his congratulations, followed by Aaron. We spent the rest of the afternoon visiting, and later Laura offered to make dinner. The women took charge of the kitchen while the men shared a bottle of whiskey. By the time dinner was ready, we were a bit tipsy but in high spirits. The meal was lively, but as the night wore on, everyone became a bit too drunk. Aaron mentioned their car was missing, which set off a round of laughter when they remembered they had left it by the highway. I took Connie to pick up the car, making her promise to call when they got home safely. That night, as Laura and I lay in bed, she smiled, "I'm glad they didn't stay. Now we have the house to ourselves." The next morning, while enjoying coffee outside, I got a call from my lawyer reminding me about the upcoming USERRA trial. The week passed quickly, consumed by the court proceedings. The company tried to discredit me, even bringing in difficult employees to testify, but I had solid evidence that turned the case in my favor. The judge awarded me back pay, a promotion, and punitive damages for the company's illegal actions. Despite the victory, the company appealed, so I wasn't able to return to work right away. 3 weeks later, Laura and I got married by the river at her parents' place. We didn't take a traditional honeymoon since I had a short tour of duty in Great Britain, so Laura joined me and we turned it into a 3-month honeymoon, traveling around the UK and even visiting France. When we returned, we had exciting news. Laura was pregnant with twins. She had conceived just after we arrived in Great Britain, but we waited until we were back home to share the news. As her pregnancy progressed, Laura became more beautiful, often joking about her appearance, but to me she was radiant. In the 3rd month, we discovered she was carrying twins. When the big day arrived, Laura's labor was quick, and soon we welcomed our daughter, Constance, and son, Ronald. They were healthy and perfect, and I had never seen Laura look happier. Our home quickly became too small, so I started building 2 additional bedrooms and an office. When Charlie visited, he and his girlfriend couldn't get enough of the babies. 4 months later, I finally won the appeal against my former employer, and they settled with a substantial payout. With that and our savings, Laura and I were set for life. One day, while shopping at Walmart, I spotted my ex-wife, Bula. Laura, ever the firecracker, walked right up to her and said, "Thank you for making me the happiest woman alive. I don't know why you let Ron go, but I thank you for it every day." Bula, with tears in her eyes, looked at me and whispered, "You deserve it, Ronnie." "Have a good life." Laura smiled, took my hand, and we walked away, content and happy. After that unexpected encounter with Bula, Laura and I didn't dwell on it. She had said her piece, and it seemed to close a chapter for both of us. Life carried on peacefully, and Laura and I grew even closer. I remained in the reserves but reduced my tours, choosing to spend more time at home. Recently, I had been promoted to lieutenant colonel, and being home with Laura and our growing family made me happier than ever. I purchased the land next to ours, the one Roger had wanted, and let him and Aaron farm it, helping them out when they needed an extra hand. Life in our small town settled into a comfortable rhythm. Most mornings I enjoyed coffee with my in-laws in Steelville, but I still preferred having coffee with Laura by the river when the weather was nice. Time flew by, and before we knew it, years had passed. One evening, Jeff, Charlie, our wives, and I were sitting by the river at Jeff's place, drinks in hand, listening to our kids play in the old swimming hole. We couldn't help but exchange proud glances at our wives. Over the years we had all grown close, and there was a silent understanding between us. Laura still held my heart, and my love for her had only deepened with time. As she passed by with another round of drinks, I set my glass down, grabbed her by the waist, and pulled her into my lap. She let out a playful squeal, then collapsed into my arms, laughing. I kissed her deeply, and as I gazed into her eyes, I knew the night ahead would be special. Turning to our friends, I said, "This woman is my everything. She saved me. You all know how lost I was after my first marriage, but these last 11 years with Laura have been the best of my life." Laura blushed but smiled proudly, kissing me again. Just as we started to pull away, one of the kids shouted, "Dad, can't you wait until you get home?" We all laughed as the kids, dripping wet, looked at us in mock disgust. Laura smiled warmly and said, "You've seen us kiss before. I love him dearly, and I'll never deny him his kisses. Now go clean up, supper's almost ready." Amanda, Charlie's wife, chimed in, "Laura, that's exactly how I feel about Charlie. We all have the perfect men, and there's nothing we wouldn't do for them." Nora nodded, and the bond between us deepened. The rest of the evening was filled with laughter, good food, and stories, just another unforgettable night with our family and friends. As the years went by, Jeff, Charlie, and I all retired from the reserves. Jeff became a major general, Charlie a colonel, and I retired as a brigadier general. Every day I was grateful that Laura had pursued me, helping me realize how perfect we were together. Eventually, our twins, Connie and Ronnie, graduated from high school, with Connie as valedictorian and Ronnie as salutatorian. They both chose to attend my alma mater nearby, so we rented them an apartment so they could fully experience college life. Laura and I were proud of the advice and guidance we had given them, but we knew they had to forge their own paths. One evening, as Laura and I reflected on how far we'd come, I said, "Kids learn as much from our example as they do in the classroom. I think we've done well by them." She smiled and leaned into me. I think so too. As the sun set and the river shimmered in golden light, I felt a deep sense of peace. Laura, as always, was by my side, and together we had built a life that exceeded all my expectations. With the kids out for the evening, I turned to see Laura waiting for me by the river, looking breathtaking in my favorite dress. The sight of her took my breath away, and I knew I wasn't about to let this perfect moment slip by.